Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Google Nexus 5X. It's a smartphone with a 5.2-inch 1920 by 1080 pixel display, Qualcomm Snapdragon 808 6-core processor, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and it's one of the first phones to ship with Android 6.0 Marshmallow. It's also one of the first phones with the Nexus Imprint Fingerprint scanner, which is one of the things that I think is really sort of one of the nicest upgrades over the last phone made by LG for Google, which was the 2013 Google Nexus 5. So the new phone has a larger screen, but the same amount of RAM, same screen resolution, and they both have mono speakers. So what are the improvements? Well, we've got a better camera, a better battery life, and that fingerprint sensor. And there's one other thing that's kind of nice here, which is that it's got a USB Type-C connector for reversible charging and for faster charging. It's not faster in terms of data connections. It's still a USB 2.0 speed port, but it does allow for about 4 hours of battery life from about 10 minutes of charge time. So let's take a quick look at some of the features that makes the new phone different and some of the features that aren't really so different from earlier versions of the Nexus lineup. So first we've got that fingerprint scanner. You can almost use it like a power button because you just sort of tap the back and it unlocks and turns on the phone. If you go to your lock screen, you can also just tap it to skip past those things. I'm just going to make my notifications go away here for a second. So it's super fast. You can register multiple fingerprints, so I can unlock the phone with either hand right now because I've got my index finger in each hand, or you can register other members of your family to unlock it. In addition to unlocking the device, you can use the fingerprint scanner to unlock applications. So you can use Android Pay for mobile payments if you're going to use your phone for that, or third-party applications like the LastPass password manager are starting to tap into it, allowing you to unlock features in those applications. As we mentioned, USB 2.0. We've got a headset jack here below the bottom, or on the bottom of the phone instead of the top. Power and volume buttons, a nano SIM card slot, and then on the back we've got this 12.3 megapixel camera, which is designed to take better low light pictures. It's the same camera that you get on the new Nexus 6P, which is a phone with a 5.7-inch higher resolution display and a faster processor. Because the Nexus 6P has a faster processor, it has a few camera features that are software-oriented that are not available on the Nexus 5X, including support for slow-motion video recording and image stabilization. That said, the camera is pretty good in terms of low-light photography and sort of snapping photos quickly and efficiently. You can switch to video mode, and it supports 4K video as well as 1080p or 720p video. And we can access the settings from this menu. So we can change resolution. Front-facing camera is a 5 megapixel camera. That's also an improvement from earlier versions. And again, you can see we can support 4K video, panorama, and so forth. One nice new addition here is that you can double-click the power button to fire up the camera from any screen. And that's relatively fast. When the screen is turned off, you can also double tap and go straight to the camera. Now from here, if you wanted to open the settings, you'd still need to unlock your phone. So that's a quick look at the camera functionality. Another thing I wanted to point out is that there's a mono speaker, which is a front-facing speaker, so instead of facing the bottom like it did in the Nexus 5, it's now front-facing, but it's not a stereo speaker. And something that a lot of people have been wondering is there a notification light? Well, there is. So I'm going to go ahead and send myself an email here just to make that happen. And in a second, you should see pulse and pulse. Now, in addition to the light pulsing, you can see we've also got the screen sort of comes to life here, and that's because of ambient display technology. So they both have IPS displays, but the Nexus 5X supports ambient display, whereas the Nexus 5 does not. And that means that when new notifications come in, the screen sort of springs to life briefly. When you pick up the phone after a period of inactivity, you should also be able to see those notifications. It's not working now because I don't think I left it alone long enough, but that's another nice feature that you get here that you don't get on the older Nexus. Now that said, just make these notifications go away. That said, you also get a significantly larger device. 5.2 inches versus 5 inches might not sound like a big difference, but when it comes to trying to reach your thumb across the screen, I think it does actually make a pretty big difference. So I've noticed for certain things like, I usually hold this left-handed, but using Feedly to browse news, apparently I've actually caught up on all my news, using Feedly to browse news, it's kind of hard to reach the top of the screen with my thumb. So that 5.2-inch display is kind of a downside for me. I really do prefer the size of the 5-inch Nexus 5 a little bit more. But because you do get a better camera, you get ambient notifications, you get fast charging from that USB 2.0 port. I think the upgrade might be worth it for a lot of people, especially if you're interested in that fingerprint sensor, which I really thought was kind of gimmicky before I tried it, but I do quite like it. Another thing about that fingerprint sensor I forgot to mention is since it's on the back, it's really easy to hit with your finger when you're just holding the phone. You don't have to reach down to an awkward location on the front of the phone like you do on some other devices. So fingerprint sensor, ambient notifications, and faster charging, better battery life. In terms of battery life, I've noticed that it gets through a whole day, no problem. It's got a 2700 milliamp hour battery, and with 3+ hours of screen on time, leaving it unplugged from morning till night, I haven't had trouble. Now, I've only had the phone for a couple of days as of the time that I'm posting this review. Google just sort of sent it to me on a Friday and said, Monday I can tell people about it. So it's not a lot of time for battery life testing, but I will say it's definitely a big improvement over the Nexus 5, based on my testing. It has 802.11ac Wi-Fi, and does a pretty good job in terms of Wi-Fi performance. I'm testing them on different networks. I'm using the Nexus 5 on AT&T's Straight Talk network versus Google's Project Fi. And reception for Project Fi is maybe not quite as good as for the AT&T Straight Talk network. There's been a couple of places where the signal's dropped out on this phone where I've had it on this phone, but for the most part, it seems to get the job done. But this isn't really supposed to be a review of Project Fi. It's just that when Google loaned me the phone, they also loaned me a Project Fi card, so I've been testing that a little bit. So in terms of performance, we're going from a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor to an 808 processor, 6 cores versus 4 cores, and you would think that this one would be faster, and for the most part it is in terms of benchmarks. It also supports OpenGL ES 3.1, which this one does not. So when you're running games and other sorts of things, you might notice a difference. When you run benchmarks, you definitely get a higher score. But in terms of day-to-day performance, it's not always that easy to see the difference. So let's just sort of do a couple of quick tests here. Okay, well, that's not a fair test because somebody ran out of memory. Another thing I should point out is that this phone is encrypted and this one is not. So it's not particularly easy to play two games at the same time here, but you can see they both load pretty quickly when applications are in memory. Not a huge difference in terms of performance, even with games. Depends on the games, I imagine. But when you do run benchmarks, and you can find more details about this at liliputing.com, you will note that the Nexus 5X does come out ahead. But in terms of day-to-day performance, in terms of web browsing, in terms of running third-party applications, in terms of running games, in terms of just sort of, you know, your typical Android activities. Oops. So we're getting a little bit more lag here. on two phones running Android 6.0 that have been set up relatively recently, there's not a huge difference between the Snapdragon 800 and the Snapdragon 808 and the Nexus 5 and the Nexus 5X. They're both pretty good phones. If in terms of the size, I'm going to have a hard time giving up the Nexus 5. I think I might hold on to it a little bit longer. But that said, I really have gotten rather fond of the better camera, the fingerprint sensor, and the fast charging capabilities of the Nexus 5X, and the ambient display technology is nice too. In terms of the charger, I should point out that the Nexus 5X comes with a fast charging USB 2.0 or USB Type-C to USB Type-C connector. If you did opt for the larger Nexus 5 or Nexus 6P, it comes with an adapter that allows you to plug it into a standard USB Type-A port. So you've got C on one end and A on the other, as well as a longer C to C port or a connector. But this is a pretty tiny cable, so odds are if you're going to want to do more than plug it into a computer or something that's sitting right next to it, you're going to want to get a longer cable anyway, so a third-party accessory might be necessary. But I'll have more details about the Nexus 6P in a separate video. It has a lot of the same software features. It does have a faster processor, it has 3 gigabytes of RAM, a higher resolution 5.7-inch 2560 by 1440 pixel display. As long as you like big phones, it's probably the better option. It's a little bit more expensive though, of course. But overall, similar design in spite of the fact that this is a Huawei phone versus an LG phone. But this video, I just wanted to do an overview of the Nexus 5X, show you what to expect, and you can find more details and hopefully answers to your questions at Liliputing.com. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing and the Google Nexus 5X.